Hello, Gremlins! After the last video, I needed a simpler project to reset my creativity and have a chance to rest, and I decided to redraw some more of my old art, this time an early piece from when I was developing my current digital art style. This drawing was created when I was around 16 and just starting to figure out that I wasn't straight during the pandemic. I made a lot of drawings of girls in love over the course of a few months, as at the time, my art was my only outlet. This is just one of those drawings, a piece I titled As Different as Night and Day, with the concept of human versions of night and day standing with clasped hands and foreheads touching, with sunset colors behind them. Had I thought ahead a bit with my schedule, I probably should have released this video during Pride Month, but I didn't decide I'd be redrawing a particularly queer piece of art until the day before I started drawing, and while I did draw these characters in June, the video isn't coming out until July. This art isn't nearly as bad as some of my other earlier art, but the body proportions are quite strange, with tiny hands and huge heads. The pose is a little awkward, but it isn't horrible, so my first step of creating an updated version of this art was deciding if I wanted to just slightly update the pose, or put these characters in a completely new position. I sketched a few versions of poses with the same soft romantic vibes as my original art aimed for, and decided to keep the two women facing each other in side profile, but instead of hands clasped, Night has a hand on Day's waist, and Day is brushing her fingers along Night's face. I then had to figure out how to actually draw this pose, especially the hands, and spent about half an hour attempting to take reference photos using myself and a dress form with a rubber ball taped to the top for a head. Mostly I just needed to figure out how Day's hand would look with one finger lifting Night's chin. Once I had the figures sketched, I paused my recording for a while to figure out how these characters would be dressed. I wanted to keep the original vibe of Night being alternative and Day being in a more rustic outfit, but I wanted to add a lot more detail and character to their clothing than my original drawing had. I've gotten a much bigger interest in style, fashion, and aesthetics since I was 16 and just discovering alternative clothing. Also, while I don't mind Night's style in the original image, Day just looks plain, especially given how many motifs can be associated with the concept of daytime. I spent a while on Pinterest looking at images of Day and Night, as well as alternative, goth, whimsy gothic, and cottagecore styles, and I returned to my sketch with a bunch of notes about clothing pieces and ideas to get me going. I started with Night's clothing. I knew that I wanted to still give her a jacket, like she has in the original image, and I like the idea of her being dressed for cooler weather than Day is, since nights are colder. However, where the jacket in the original is designed to be leather, this jacket is dark denim, and I added a lot more details to it, foregoing the spikes to instead make moon-shaped cuff buttons, the phases of the moon painted across the shoulders, and made-up constellations embroidered on the body and sleeves. At first, I thought the rest of Night's outfit would be a celestial patterned dress, like some dresses I was inspired by on Pinterest. However, after sketching the skirt in, I decided I would rather maintain Night's more masculine or androgynous style, so I erased the skirt and instead gave Night jeans covered in patches and a tank top under her jacket. I changed Day's clothing way more than I changed Night's. Day is now wearing short overalls with a belt of golden suns around her hips, and a button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled up that I'm going to pattern with nature and floral designs. She has large sun earrings to match her belt and contrast with Night's moon earrings, and her hair is now in a thick wavy ponytail rather than a thin braid. I also gave Day a tattoo on her forearm, a vine wrapped around her arm surrounded by butterflies to match Night's moth patch. I fully turned the canvas upside down to sketch the tattoo, since the design is upside down with Day's arm position. At this point, I removed my reference image of the previous artwork from the corner of my screen. Usually, I keep it handy through the whole process of redrawing a piece of art, but I've changed the designs of these characters so much that I really don't need it. While I started the sketch with Night, since I had a clearer concept of her style, I started the line art with Day, beginning with her jewelry, which is all outlined in color rather than black. For now, those lines are orange, but I'll recolor them when I know the rest of the color scheme. I began with Day's large sun earrings, trying to freehand it at first, then deciding to draw one stylized ray and copy it, rotating it around a circle to give the earrings a more unified look. I copied that one sun graphic and used it on the belt as well, slightly warping the suns near Day's back and belly to make her look 3D. As well as the earrings and belt, Day also has a collection of bracelets on her hand, and a ring with a large stone on the finger she's caressing Night's face with. I finished the jewelry outlines and began the main lines of the body, starting with my thick outer outline, then beginning to work on the hair and face. I eventually returned to the colored line art to add more details to Day's clothing, specifically some embroidered flowers on her overalls and the pattern of sunflowers on her shirt. I also added outlines to her tattoo, which are black but set to a lower opacity so the tattoo blends well with her skin when I color it in. With Day outlined, I turned back to Night, and this time, rather than drawing all the jewelry and colored lines first, then all the black lines, I alternated between the two as I worked on the design. Where the colored outlines on Day are temporarily orange, Night's are temporarily blue to separate them. Night has a lot of piercings, a detail I kept from the original, and her hair is the same half-shaved, short, and alternative style that she had before. She still has a spiked choker around her neck, but now also has a belt with star-shaped rivets and a belt chain on her hip. Her pants have several plain rectangular patches sewn on under a moth patch, and the empty spaces are filled with embroidered stars. I was jumping around a lot from detail to detail as I outlined Night. All the details were ones I was so excited to draw. The constellations on Night's jacket aren't real constellations, they're just random clusters of stars joined by lines, but the effect is the same, and it took a lot less reference images to draw than real constellations would have. Both Day and Night have very maximalist style, so these outlines took a while, but I really enjoyed working on them, and I love the designs so much. I went straight from outlining Night to coloring her, keeping a very night-related color palette of black, dark blues, and dark purples, with white and pale silver as highlights. All her jewelry is various shades of bluish silver, which looks more dynamic than just shading it all with grey would have. I I really like Knight's jacket. I wouldn't personally wear it simply because I don't wear blue, but I kind of want to make a jacket like this, using a thrifted denim jacket and adding beads for stars and patches for moons, and maybe sell it or give it to a friend who wears these colors. Or choose a black jacket instead so it goes with my personal wardrobe. I also really like Knight's pants. I've made patch-covered pants before, but I've never made patches shaped like a thing, in this case a moth. They've always just been rectangles. I'm not sure how difficult it would be to hem a moth-shaped patch, but I want to try now, again in a different color scheme to go with my wardrobe. I should stop giving myself so many ideas. I have a page-long list of DIY and sewing projects already. I'm not sure if in the original image the characters are actual humanizations of night and day, or are just normal humans very dedicated to the aesthetic, but I like the idea that these updated versions are more than just visually connected to the concept. They aren't literally day and night, but I think maybe they are magic users or witches that derive their power from the sun and daylight and the moon and starlight respectively. Day has warm magic surrounding plants and growing things, and also fire and heat and light. Night has cold magic relating to water and darkness and dreams, and when she creates light, it's faint compared to day's blinding rays. I also think that day is more powerful in daytime and night at night, with the peak of their powers being noon and midnight. Dawn and dusk are when their powers are weakest and they have to rely on each other, giving the other strength they don't have for themselves. While they are always close, lovers and foils at all times, dawn and dusk are when they are their closest and most vulnerable. Back to talking through my art process as I finish up Night and begin to colour Day. The final touches to Night's design were dark lipstick and heavy eye makeup, both carried over from her original look. Like with Night, I started Day by working on her jewellery, most of it gold with some green on her ring and in her woven bracelet. While both Night and Day have a lot of detail in their outfits, Day's outfit did take longer both in the line art and the colouring, because of the pattern on her shirt and the fact that a lot of her detail involves spikes or points, which take longer to colour than the round shapes of Night's motifs. Day's shirt pattern is floral, with large yellow sunflowers and tiny pale yellow flowers to fill the spaces between, all on a green background. The sunflowers are 4 colours each, 2 shades of brown for the centres and 2 shades of yellow for the petals, which is why it took so long to colour, although the results are 100% worth it. Where Night's colour palette is cool and dark, Day's is very warm and autumnal. Her overalls are a rich reddish brown, her jewellery and shirt shades of green and gold, and have made her skin very tan from the sun. Day likes clothing and fashion. She wouldn't put this much detail and effort into her clothing if she didn't. However, all her clothes must also be practical, since she will end up with her hands in the dirt gardening, or skipping through a field of flowers, or wading into a muddy stream to fill her pockets with rocks. I think this hands-on personality would also extend to Day's magic. Night's magic is much more thought-based, spells and concentration, but Day uses objects and infuses them with power. Day coaxes plants and animals to do her bidding, she uses herbs and material components to cast spells, and is much more physically connected to her magic in that way. This also does lead to some limitations. While Night can use her powers in any circumstances as long as she can speak and think, Day needs access to her supplies. Her pockets are always full of a few components just in case, and her jewellery is also infused with the sun's power, giving her more power even at night. This also means her jewellery always feels warm. I do find it interesting that, while both characters got a lot more detail in their redesigns, Day's is a much bigger contrast to her original design, which was a plain, undecorated blouse and skirt. About the only detail that stayed the same for Day is her height compared to Night and the colour of her hair, which is light brown. At first I was going to keep the background to the simple sunset gradient of the original image, to make the characters stand out against it, but instead I decided to make it just a little bit better, and after looking up some reference images of sunset skies, I added some pink and purple clouds and changed the colours a little bit to make them more accurate. I started shading Day's skin and hair next. The image is backlit from the setting sun, which means the shadows are higher contrast and there's more of them compared to the highlights in the image. My original drawing is also backlit, technically, but there is so little shading that you can barely tell. During the process it kind of looks like I'm sunburning Day, but once all the shadows are added it looks a lot more normal, although I do still tone down the shadows on her arm later in the process. I also used warmer toned shading on Day than I did Night. Once I'd individually shaded each character's skin and hair, I added a shadow layer over both of them, originally blue but changed to purple to look more like sunset light. I ended up with 3 light-related layers on each character. Since so much of the character is in shadow, the first shadow layer left a lot of the character looking flat, so I added a second shadow layer in darker and cooler purple to add more dimension. I also have a golden light layer on top of each character to add the rim lights around them, making it look like the glow of the setting sun is shining upon this moment between them. I liked this drawing even when it was just flat colours. The outfits really speak to me. I'm really happy with the pose, and I think the colour schemes of each character is perfect. Adding the shadows and sunlight though just brings it to a whole nother level. It's skills like this that I've developed in the last couple years that really improve my art, beyond just getting better at proportions and posing without tracing your hands from a PNG on Google Images. I realised when I'd finished the main shadow and light layers that I'd neglected the jewellery, which I usually give it individual attention to the same way I do hair and skin. In order to get accurate colours on the shiny metal, I turned off my shadow layers while I worked. I started with Day's gold suns and bracelets, using a rich honey brown for the shadows and a pale yellow, almost white, for the highlights. I'm not going into extreme detail on the metal, just making sure that each jewellery piece looks shiny, without highlighting all the ridges and dips that would be present in these designs. After changing the colours, I also added shading to the outlines to match. I followed the same process on Night's silver jewellery, just using a deep blues and pale greys instead of golden browns. I did realise during the editing that I was also planning on giving Night one nail with silver sparkly polish, which I completely forgot about, leaving her with just a plain grey nail, but it's a minor detail, just pretend her ring finger is sparkly. Finally, I could turn my shadow layers back on, and add a bit of vignette to mimic mimic the old black border I used to put around all my digital art as a 16-year-old trying to create a brand on DeviantArt. I'm glad that phase of my style is thoroughly phased out. And with that, I'm done. Here's the original art from 4 years ago, and here is my redraw. I've already talked about how happy I am with this update, but I just wanted to say again, this has been one of my favorite art pieces to work on in a while. I had so much fun with these characters and the level of detail in their outfits, and I think it turned out looking so good. I'm so happy with how much I've grown as an artist. Thanks for watching. If you're still here, chances are that you like what I do, so please consider liking the video and subscribing for more art-related content. Until next time, bye!